from my childhood, not a childhood love, but my younger brother's best friend, somebody I grew up with, and we had both been in marriages or whatever, in relationships over the years that we'd seen each other, and we reconnected. And so I jokingly say that I left LA to play the role of the Midwestern housewife in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it was a wonderful 3.5 years, a nice run, but the marriage didn't last, unfortunately. I thought that all that history would bode well for the connection between us and give us a good foundation, but it turns out it doesn't necessarily. And so I had a decision to make. Do I go back home to LA, or do I move home where I grew up? And I decided to move home to where I grew up, and it was the best decision I could have made because I love it there. I moved back to a little town, somewhat equivalent to the town I grew up in. I grew up in a little town called New York Mills, just outside Utica, New York. And Cazenovia is a similarly populated town, a little over 3,000 people, just outside Syracuse. And I like it. That's what resonates with my soul. Even in LA, people say, how did you do there? And I said, well, I just immediately created a small world. I would go to the same place for my gas, to the same grocery store, and I would get to know the people's names, and that made living in such a sprawling metropolis. It just made you feel a little more anchored and connected to something, because one can feel quite disconnected, I think, and isolated in big towns. So I made myself my own little village in Los Angeles. I made great friends. I was just there again, guys. I was out in California for 2 weeks just before the pandemic started, visiting with my buds. I do this sort of like big circle. I have a good friend who lives in Venice, then I have a good friend who lives in Reseda, in the Valley, and then I go to North Hollywood, and then I go to see my brother and his wife. My younger brother and his wife have retired, and they live in La Quinta on a golf course. It's my brother's wet dream. And they're like crazy pickleball players. So golf and pickleball and golf and pickleball and Netflix and golf and pickleball, and they're so happy they can't see straight. And so I spend like a week with them, and then I circle back to a good friend who lives in Redondo Beach, who's not far from the airport. So I do this loop, and I just did the loop for the first time in a couple of years 2 weeks ago. I was just there. So I have great friends and great appreciation for that chapter in my life, but I would not want to live there again. Very much similar to, you said you were educated there for 5 years, and it was a great place to visit. Yeah. She want to live there. So in any case, I'm settled in upstate New York, and something very cliche happened. I bought this ancient home, like an almost 200-year-old home in this little village, and I fell in love with the contractor. I interviewed.
So a Hallmark movie.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I don't know what it's fodder for, but yeah. I interviewed for the dude I hired was in my house every day for 2 weeks, and oh my God, I mean, how predictable is it that it was like. Well, the funny thing is I sat him down at the lunch table like about a week in, and I said, I'd like to borrow your sperm. I know, right? I know that sounds crazy, but I was hell-bent. So I was coming out of my third marriage when I moved back to upstate New York, and I was a pretty sad girl. But I found this house, and this house made me feel hope again. And now that I'm in real estate, because the gentleman I connected with was a builder, now that I'm in real estate, I wish that everybody who ever bought a home would feel the way I felt about this particular house. I walked in, and it's like I went from what will become of me to I can do this. This house made me feel power and hope and optimism, and I'm an optimistic person by nature. But coming out of my third marriage in my late 40s, I just thought, nobody's ever going to love me again. And definitely having a family was probably out of the question at that point. But so there I was in this house feeling all this confidence and hope for my future again. And what do? I asked the contractor if I can borrow his sperm. Not the traditional way, in a laboratory type of thing. And I wanted to have a family. I thought I'm just going to do it myself. But I was way too late to the game. Way too late to the game. I didn't realize that women in their 40s who were having babies with their own eggs, that they weren't their own eggs, is what I'm trying to say. 20 years ago, it was somebody else's eggs. You had to borrow eggs. And I have a hard time asking for a ride home if you're going right by my house, much less asking somebody like, could I have your eggs, please? So anyway, the whole thing, it didn't go anywhere. But he ended up, we ended up getting together as a couple and talking about more serious and interesting things than just borrowing DNA. And that's how that started. And he was in construction. And so I had to get back into the workforce. I honestly thought I would go into criminal justice. Even though I became an actress as a young woman, I really wanted to be a homicide detective. I was a bit obsessed with murder when I was a young lady. A couple of events that occurred, made me that way. Truman Capote's In Cold Blood was on the television, and I thought, oh my God, if this can happen to a lovely family in Kansas, it could happen to my family. And so I would do murder drills. I'm not joking. Like I was probably 10 or something at the time, and I would practice escaping from my bedroom on a window that was we lived in a ranch, so the windows were high in the bedroom. You couldn't really see through them from just standing in the room. But I would get up on my bed and then open the window and squeeze past the mechanism that opened it. It was like an eyelash window, and jump to the ground below. And then I would go to the garage and I would get a ladder and I would put it up against my brother's windows or my father's and mother's windows, so that I could warn them, that bad people are here. And then I thought, well, what if they come and I'm in the basement? So I would practice getting into the dryer, every part of me, but one leg, because I thought if I'm stuck here, I'm going to be so embarrassed to my mother, who finds me stuck in the dryer. Help! Help! I've crawled in and I can't get out. So I'm probably coming off as quite strange right now, but I can assure you it was the Girl Scout in me that wanted to be prepared, and so this whole thing hardwired me. For years, I wouldn't even be in a space without that I would have my back to an opening or a window or a door or something. I would always be to the wall so I could see danger coming. I don't know what that was about, but in any case, I didn't become a homicide detective. And I thought at that point in my life, in my late 40s, I would go to grad school and I would be in criminal justice. And I ended up becoming a real estate agent and representing the gentleman whose DNA I asked to borrow because he built really nice houses. But I have a feeling that that if he was a widget dude, I'd be selling widgets right now. For me, it was more about teaming up with somebody at that point in my life, in my work area, versus what we were selling necessarily. But I have become, 17 years in, a very good real estate agent. If any of you, I wasn't planning on saying this, but if any of you are thinking of buying or selling a home, I can work with you by referral. I know that might seem strange, but it's very common in my industry, especially if you want a second opinion in the process, someone you know and trust. Like me, I can help beam you one way or another into or out of a house. So we can talk about that later. But anyway, I'm not acting anymore. I did write a piece for myself about, oh God, it's embarrassing to say. The piece is probably 20 years old now, at least. And it's my romantic odyssey. I grew up in a household where one's affection was and connection to whatever. One's love life was wholly supported. Lots of hugs in my family and a celebration of the connection between people and stuff. And so my brothers and I grew up, very wholesomely in the arena of love, if you will. We're big lovers and we're big touchers and we're sensualists and so coming of age in the 70s, I probably overdid it. Let's put it that way. And because there was little embarrassment in my family, I had no problem talking about it. And I used to tell stories actually in the waiting room. The auditions for, the audition rooms would be filled with other actresses like myself, similar type and stuff, and we all became friends. The people who had a good approach actually enjoyed the camaraderie between actors. It wasn't a competition, and really. If you looked at it that way, you'd go crazy. The bottom line was, if you and I were in, auditioning for the part and you got it, it was meant to be yours. I didn't lose. It was meant to be yours, and you move on to the next thing. And when I got it, it was meant to be mine. And that's kind of how I approached it. I think to just sort of keep an even keel in a very competitive industry. But I would tell they'd say, okay, so what's going on, Robin? And I would tell some crazy story, that happened to me with a man. And they'd say, you got to write that down. You got to write that stuff down. And I'd be like, no, who's interested in my love life? And then, I finally thought, well, maybe I'll start writing it down. And so I started to tell my story of my sort of evolution on the planet as a loving human being, let's put it that way. And it started to sort of take shape. And the brief time I lived in Cincinnati, see, I was meant to go there, and I was meant to be in that wrong marriage. I joined a women's writing group, and it was phenomenal. The support and the brain power in that room, the estrogen helping other women. It was just so awesome. And I'll tell you a little side thing. The woman who ran the group, there were like 20 of us, I'd say, and we would meet once a week for 3 hours. And so you can imagine with 20 women writing, you can't all share your work with everyone in the group. So what she did was she would take a portion of the evening and break it up into smaller groups so that you were going to be working more thoroughly and more personally with that group, developing your work. And I told her, I'm writing about my sexual life. And she puts me in a group with a nun. And I called her and I said, you are either immensely cruel or brilliant. I can't tell which. And I said, really? I said, really? You expect me to be comfortable talking about, and I leave nothing out, of this topic, with a nun in my group. Sister Mary Cabrini, Durkin. And she said, Robin, do it. Just go for it. Trust me. And so I it's not that I didn't trust her, but the next time I went to class, I brought in a little piece I was working on. If you've lived in LA, the whole time I lived there, I was composing a driver's manual in my brain. And it wasn't, it wasn't the legal manual. It was, personality, like driving back personality, like if you're going slow, get the fuck out of the fast lane, right? That kind of a manual. And so I brought in a little chapter from the driving manual to share. And as I'm leaving my little group to go back to the big group, Sister Mary Cabrini, she patted me on the fanny and she goes, stick to the sex. I'm like, Cabrini, oh my God! So I didn't hold back. I brought back chapter after chapter. This one on STDs, this one on infertility, this one on marital sex, this one on porn, this one on masturbation. I brought it all. And Sister Mary Cabrini sometimes gave me the best feedback of all. So never shortchange a nun. And never, and I suppose this is a good message for today. Never judge someone who may have a different worldview than you. Not to be an amazing soul sister or brother, and this comes back to why we're all here today. That's what I love about Star Trek. It's all about connection. If I'm in a room with people like you, I know already there's something between us, that's of substance, and that we have an affinity for one another because we all respect what Gene Roddenberry created, and on some level, it made our lives better. It made our worldview better. It taught us to embrace diversity, to have tolerance, to have an optimism for humanity and our survival. And it's all about connection. And that's what I love about Star Trek. It's a theme that I can defend and stand up for, and it works every day. There's not a day that it doesn't work. So anyway, I've gone on and all over the map here, so I want to sort of turn it back to you.
I think it's awesome, and it says a lot about you and your talent that you're so bubbly like this, and that you're so awesome, but yet you played a character, Savvik, who is so in control of her emotions.
Jim, it near about killed me. Thank you.
It's amazing. It just shows how much talent you are, because
I adored it for that observation, seriously, because
it's amazing.
I said to Leonard Nimoy the first day, I said, Mr. Nimoy, you seem to think I know what I'm doing, and I don't have a clue what I'm doing, and I'm going to get a little emotional. Honestly, it because again, like the teacher assigning a nun to my writing material. I thought, could this be more bizarre? I'm a human being who is just a walking emotional, nerve, a raw nerve, and I get my first major motion picture role, I'm supposed to be stoic and unemotional. I sincerely thought I would be fired at least the first week. Maybe that fear lessened the second or third week, because you get so much in the can, so to speak, and on film they can't go back. It's too much money to redo it. But I felt so constipated, so stiff and robotic. But at some point I had to trust Leonard Nimoy, that he had my back and that I wasn't going to make a fool of myself. Things like, what do the young Spock and Savvik do in the cave? Both Steve Manley and I are like, what is Vulcan foreplay? We don't know. What is Leonard going to bring to us that morning? And so, we both show up to work going, okay, what's it going to be? And he takes us over in the corner and he shows us this very simple finger play, and we're like, okay. We can do that. We can imbue in that, the same kind of intimacy we would imagine there is, from a human standpoint, with more human interaction, physical interaction. And I loved him for that. I loved him, he was an actor like me that has a great deal of respect and wanted to honor the franchise, and the Vulcan folklore and what had already been established. So, it meant a lot to us to get it right, or to bring the right pathos, to that moment. When I had to tell Kirk that, his son is dead, I thought, how am I going to say that without any emotion? It just was, it felt mean, like, this is mean. But I trusted Leonard Nimoy. And he knew it. Before we would shoot every scene, there would be like a little ledge on the sound stage, of the stage platform, set platform, and he'd say, "Come on, let's sit down. I want to hear it." And we would sit there and do the lines back and forth. And honestly, if I wasn't quite capturing, a subtle wryness or something in my delivery, he would give me a line reading. I invited him to. That would normally be considered an insult to most actors, for a director. They'll give them a line reading. In other words, to parrot what they just said or mimic what they just said. But that was not the case with Mr. Nimoy and I. He knew I relied upon him, and he promised he wouldn't take me out on the limb and leave me there dangling without a safety net. And he kept his promise. It's one of the reasons there's a picture on my table where he's got his arm around me casually, and he's pointing out something. And I remember, just being very inquisitive about everything. Like, what am I wearing? Why is this flak jacket so bulky? What's this pocket for? What does this tricorder do? Why, and he was very, cordial about helping me understand all the nuts and bolts of the things around me that are so foreign and different. But the picture, I felt, just sort of represents how connected I was to him and how much I enjoyed his guidance. And he was just a very classy man in that moment. Because I knew I was coming into an interesting situation where an actor was coming from in front of the camera and going behind, and he was now having to, command all sorts of personalities, the factions, the supporting cast that he's worked with for many years. Bill, who's a faction unto himself, if you know what I mean. And then there's the newcomers. There's the newcomers like me and Stephen Manley and so on. And then there's the Christopher Lloyds of the world, who are phenomenal actors and very successful in their own right. And I just had a lot of admiration as an observer, watching this human being deftly give credence to each part of the team, and manage to direct them in a way that I thought was so magnanimous and respectful. Because Bill would come at the end. We would always have everything already choreographed and everything ready to go. So he was in front of the camera, or with the team, so to speak, with as little time as possible. And sometimes things would change at that moment, and we were all like, okay, Bill doesn't want to do the blocking this way. I think there was the blocking when after David has died, when it turns out I was above him on the planet floor, and so therefore stood taller than he did, and Bill was like, yeah, oh, that's not happening, and so we had to do this blocking now, so that he came past me and went above, higher on the earth, whatever the elevation, if you will, than I was. So little things like that I thought Leonard handled with diplomacy, with very nice diplomacy, and so you're not going to. My admiration for him is just manifold. I think as a human being, he lived such an authentic life. John Larroquette, when we were in the chair early in the morning, 5 a.m. and everybody else is coming in at 6:37, and there you are, you're half asleep. Like sometimes the makeup guy would have his finger on my head while he's working on my ear, because if you're sitting so still, it's hard not to fade out, right? But John was always so entertaining. He would tell crazy stories. I don't remember any particular story, but he had been an alcoholic, and he did talk about blacking out and doing an entire episode as a guest on Baba Black Sheep and not remembering any of it. Can you imagine? And he had just tested for Night Court, so that hadn't happened yet. The network had shot it, and now it was a question of was it going to go. So it was kind of fun to sit with him in the morning, and I learned later on that he took Leonard, I think possibly to his first meeting. So Leonard lived a sober life. And then years later, when he was diagnosed with COPD, he was very honest about that and encouraged people if they could, in any way, shape, or form. It's no fun to fight for your breath. And I know my mother died of COPD and much younger than Leonard at 66. But I just love that he preached. He lived his own word, and preached the truth, and I admired that a lot about him. Did you feel like you knew Leonard a little better than just, as a guest at conventions, Joe? Did you? Yeah.
I had him at about 12, 14 conventions.
Oh my gosh.
And he had good memory too.
Did he?
Yeah, because I would pick him up, and back then it was before 9/11, so you actually meet him at the gate and all
You
that.
go to the gate,
Talking a couple of times to say, by the way, how's Ashley doing? And you know my daughters.
Yeah.
So he had good memory.
Cool. I don't know if you guys know Joe Motes. Have some of you met Joe before or been a part of Volcon conventions? Yes, Louise and Louie have. This is a very dear old friend. One of the first persons that ever invited me. Tell me what?
You don't remember him? That's the board baby.
What's that?
Larry Jr.
Oh, for heaven's sakes!
We carried him for many months.
Oh my God, that's brilliant! You're all grown up.
Yep.
Oh my goodness, welcome. So nice to have it come full circle.
Yes, for sure.
Very sweet. Well, so thank you. I have Joe to thank for all these deep and wonderful memories. He was one of the first promoters that got me out of the ether, after the film was shot in the mid '80s, and we did so many conventions together. And he's the one who brilliantly, with Jimmy Doohan's assist, gave birth to the idea of taking actors and fans on a ship. And all of us, it's like, what the hell, if we're all going to meet at some hotel in Akron, Ohio, for the weekend, we may as well be on a ship and go snorkeling together. And so we had so many fabulous experiences together. Joe, you told me where to look. On YouTube, if you Google Sea Trek, I think one of the first videos that comes up is Sea Trek 89. And I started watching it this morning. And there's Gene, and there's Majel, and there's, Jimmy, and everybody. It was so much fun to watch. I'm really gonna enjoy that this winter. I'm gonna enjoy curling up with some of those videos that you've so generously done, so we can relive our memories. Is everybody okay back there?
Engineering.
Okay.
Yeah,
Engineering. Ow. Anyway, kudos to you, sweetheart, for being one of the most amazing, trustworthy, elegant human beings in this business, and I'm so glad you have integrity and class. I so appreciate it. Yeah, you bet. Where else can we take the conversation? Come on, don't be shy.
Knight Rider. You would play the Knight Rider.
Oh my goodness, yes. Can you believe it?
I know, right? That's
Wait.
another one of his favorite shows.
Oh
He
my
played, You're a winner.
I joke about my career. I did have a lot of fun. I worked enough. I say with a little tape and paste and glue, I could call it a career. Because in the end, maybe you did one voiceover job in a year. Maybe you did, 2 guest spots on one show or another, a B movie and 3 conventions, and you managed with those disparate jobs to pay your phone bill and your mortgage and everything else. And I fully intended when I moved to LA when I was 25, I thought, well, I'll get a waitressing job right away. Always a good thing to have in your back pocket when you're in a creative field. And then it never ended up having to be. And every year I just pinched myself and with gratitude that the odds worked in my favor and I worked enough to make a living. And it's particularly miraculous when I look back and think, I was not ambitious. It's not that I wasn't a hard worker and that I wasn't a professional and I wasn't a good sport. You do a B movie and somebody says, hey, look, Robin, we don't have the trailer here, but could you change costumes? Somebody's going to hold up a sheet. You're on the goddamn sidewalk. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. I'll change. And human beings are holding up like this wall around you while you do a costume change at the corner of Abbott Kinney and Venice Boulevard. It's like, what the hell? But anyway, so I mean, I'm a good sport. And I think sometimes that goes a long way. People sense that from you when you go into the audition rooms. But essentially, where was I going with that thought? Holy crap. Oh boy, this is what happens when you're old. No,
changes.
yeah, well, no, but just, I don't know that I was extraordinarily talented, but I definitely wasn't ambitious. I never went anywhere where I wasn't expected or called to be. And that's not because I thought I was better than that process. Because back in the day, that's what you were told actors had to do. You had to cold call. You had to knock on doors. You had to send your resume places. You had to do letters to producers, to casting offices, and so on. I just didn't do it because I lacked the confidence to do it. Do you know what I mean? I just don't have that muscle in me. Even as a realtor, the fact that I even said anything earlier about like, oh, I can help you is I don't know who that was. That was my evil twin. That was my evil twin because I just don't do that.
Confidence being back in the set.
What's that?
The confidence being back in the set. You just brought it on.
I don't know. Yeah, exactly, Rebecca. It's like, oh my God. We must be in a dome of insanity right now. So the fact that I worked enough to make a living is looking back, knowing my agents loved me because I never called and went, look, I want to get in on this project. It's Martin Scorsese, and I heard about the script and there's a role for me. I never did that. I never pushed or asked or pleaded or anything like that. It just wasn't in me. That muscle just wasn't in me. But I made a living. Like, holy crap. Just imagine if I had pursued, or been a little more, cheeky with myself, what might have happened. I don't know. I sat with some actors 2 weeks ago when I was in LA, and there was a small group of women at a dinner table. And I remarked, there was a casting director, former casting director, a successful actress, and a producer-writer at the table. And I said, really, in order to succeed, I think you have to have an advocate. An advocate that's already 3 steps ahead of you. And what I mean by that is maybe there's a writer or a producer or somebody like a Ron Howard type who's just starting. He just filmed Splash and now he's on to his next movie. Someone who sees you and says, I want you to come along with me. You really need that. You're not going to get it by sheer force on your own. It just doesn't happen like that. You have to, I think you have to connect with somebody just a little further along in the journey, a little more successful, who sees something in you and now wants to bring you along. And that just didn't necessarily happen for me. God knows, Leonard Nimoy, was an angel and all of that. But Leonard didn't go on to direct a lot of other movies. Do you know what I mean? Necessarily. So anyway, I'm grateful for the run that I had, and you know, when I was ready to leave Los Angeles to marry this guy from my childhood in my early 40s, I said to my ex-husband, who's like a brother now, my first ex-husband, Kent Williams, I said, you know, honey, I think before I leave LA, I'm going to take an ad in Variety. I'm going to take a full-page ad, and I'm going to call out people that I've worked with, and a couple of them were very successful commercial directors. And I said, and I'm going to thank them. I'm going to say, you know, thank